These unconventional times require unconventional conversations. Listen in as your host, Richard Gordon, engages in one-on-one conversations with numerous leaders, elected officials, politicians, and others to learn what's happening in your state, on the Hill, and across America. Now, here's the host of Unconventional Times, Richard Gordon.
Welcome to Unconventional Times. I'm your host, Richard Gordon. Department of Justice, U.S. attorneys, firings, indictments, border, deportation, ICE, gun violence, National Guard. These are just some of the words we're hearing in the news a lot lately. But do we know what they mean and how they affect each and every one of us? And that's what today's show is all about. That's what we're going to talk about. Each of these topics, because they are so important to our everyday lives. With me today is my dear old friend, Dennis Burke, who has been an insider on so many of these policies for, I hope he doesn't mind me saying, at least 30 years. He was a former U.S. attorney for the state of Arizona, the chief of staff to the governor of Arizona, Janet Napolitano, a senior advisor to the Homeland Security secretary, an assistant United States attorney general, a White House advisor, and the majority counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee. If I continue with Dennis's background, I will take our entire episode just going through his resume. Dennis is someone who really understands all these issues from an insider's perspective, and that's what he's going to share with us today. Dennis, welcome to Unconventional Times.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for inviting me, and look forward to chatting today.
Well, it's a pleasure having you on. It's great to see you. It's been way too long. You're looking good, so thank you for being here.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Hey, let's start with the Department of Justice. There is so much going on, and you are someone who truly gets it. And I will tell you something I bet you don't know. Many years ago, many years ago, I actually worked for the United States Department of Justice, quite a long time ago, but not nearly at the level that you were at. So look, you were an assistant attorney general and a United States attorney, so you understand how this works. You sort of have a very different and interesting vantage point that most people don't get. You were not only there, but you also, as I understand, you worked at the Attorney General's Advisory Committee that looks at recommendations on such things as policy and management and how to operate the department. So you really get the Department of Justice. Let me just start with it's a simple question, but a more complicated answer. How has the United States Department of Justice changed since you were there as a U.S. attorney, as the Assistant Attorney General? How has the department itself been changed?
Well, we're working at light speed right now with regards to that. It appears to be changing daily, in particular the matters we're going to discuss today. But all the more so that it seems like things are changing rapidly, and the institutions, the norms that continued through administrations of both Republican and Democrat have been extremely disrupted in the last few months, and now the last few weeks, and now the last few days. There is real continuity at the Justice Department, as there is at a lot of federal departments, which is the majority of the department, and the cases and the investigations and the policies are developed by career lawyers. I worked at the Justice Department at least three different junctures. And then obviously, as you mentioned, I worked on the Senate Judiciary Committee. So we were involved in oversight of the Justice Department. So if I wasn't working at the Justice Department, I was tethered to it in one way or another. And it just had a continuity to it. You never went into a meeting thinking, these lawyers in the room with me, my colleagues, have allegiance to a certain party or to a prior president. It was always with the best intentions of the Justice Department, not always playing out as people would expect or hope, but people coming to the table, dedicating what their careers dedicated to it, trying to come up with the best policies and decisions for the Justice Department and the purpose of the department.
Well, I think a lot of people might be a little confused by that because clearly we know that the top echelons of the Department of Justice, yourself included when you were the assistant AG, are presidential appointments, right? So the AG, the deputy AG, the assistants, et cetera, they are all political appointments. But explain to me the difference, if you would, between being a political appointment chosen by the president and being political, right? I mean, one can be chosen by a political party, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they themselves act politically. Is that fair?
That's very fair. As you pointed out, overall, it's a very small percentage, and it's the way the system's supposed to be designed. Is presidents, candidates win and become presidents, and elections have consequences, and they have policies they want to adopt or take a department in a certain direction. So, but you got to implement those policies, right? And so the idea of you kind of like, let's go back to President Clinton. He ran on 100,000 cops. He was going to do police funding, and he was going to have an
Top on
impact.
every block, I think they called it, right?
Yeah, yeah, and safe communities, and so that was his initiative, right? It wasn't the former President Bush's initiative. So he was coming into office, and he had, as you've noted, at the upper echelons of the department, he had political appointees. And the mission to the goal was, we're going to implement this program that President Clinton ran on and intends to be implemented. Well, the political folks aren't going to be able to do that on their own. I mean, and we had meetings every day. I was integrally involved in that. Meetings every day, all day long. And in those meetings were a large handful of career Justice Department officials who were helping you implement it or telling you, hey, Dennis, this isn't going to work this way. And I'm going to tell you why it's not going to work this way, because I've been here 25 years at the department. I've worked through several administrations, and I'm telling you, I know you want to do it this way. We'll get to yes. We'll get to what you want to do, but you can't do it the way you think you can do it. Here's how you should do it. That's how it works, and it works well. And so as I keep using the term continuity, there's continuity at the department that people with knowledge, experience are at the table helping you implement your policies, and the policies are of that current president and that current administration.
So how does that work with the Attorney General? I mean, we've seen very different attorneys general over the years. People who are extremely close to the president, people who aren't close to the president. The current attorney general obviously is a close political ally of the president. That's not necessarily unusual. How does the leadership of the attorney general change the way the rank and file works, the way the people at the actual department work?
Yeah, and I think if you talk to lawyers who worked at the Justice Department for Democratic administrations, who do they all look up to? They all look up to Bobby Kennedy as AG. Well, Bobby Kennedy was a president's brother.
Yeah, can't get much closer.
Can't get much closer.
I once said that to a politician who was running for president. We're talking about Attorney General. I mentioned Bobby Kennedy, and the comment was, "Not close enough."
I mean, I worked for Janet Reno, and the portrait she chose to have in her personal office at the Justice Department was the portrait of Attorney General Robert Kennedy. So the prerogative of the president to pick who he wants to be their attorney general is understandably very broad. And so that the current attorney general Bondi is a former lawyer of President Trump's in his personal capacity, but she's also former attorney general of a state, of a very large state, and a former trial attorney before that. So is she going to implement the policies of President Trump in the direction he wants to go? Yes. Does she have the background and ability to say that she's qualified? Yeah, I think I would agree with that.
Sure. You brought up Bobby Kennedy and you brought up other people. One of the things I think we're all noticing are some of the people who have been appointed by this particular administration, by this particular president. For example, one of his defense attorneys, Todd Blanche, is the number two person in the entire department. And is that appropriate? Is it appropriate? I mean, we just talked about Bobby Kennedy and how close he was, obviously, to his brother. John Mitchell, I think, was a law partner of Richard Nixon's, et cetera. But, you alluded to it before a little bit, the politicization of the department itself. Talk to me about, what happens when a Todd Blanche gets appointed uh, Deputy Attorney General of the United States. How does it work with that type of closeness to the president? What's the message it sends to you were talking about before, the rank and file?
Well, yeah, I mean, throughout the history of the Justice Department, the recent history that we can all recall, or I can speak to my own personal experience, uh, there are there are norms and policies with regards to how the White House interacts with the Justice Department, particularly the Justice Department, because the power of the Justice Department to bring criminal matters against individuals. So Todd Blanche, if you looked at his resume, and would otherwise be qualified to be in that position, but as you alluded to, and I would agree with that, what kind of message is he sending to the rest of the department, the career folks, as to whether he's there because he is qualified and he had creds with the current president? Is he there to make sure the department runs well, which is what that position is? That's a management position. Or is he there just to dictate whatever the White House is going to call him up and do? And that is a concern, and that's clearly playing out in the Comey matter. That's just that's not even questionable.
Well, I want to get to the Comey situation in a moment, but let's just stay with Mr. Blanche for a minute, Deputy Attorney General Blanche for just a moment. You haven't said the actual word, but I think you're talking about independence, right? You're talking
I
about
am.
the Department of Justice being independent it's unique. I mean, you've been in different parts of the administration. You've been in the White House, you've been at, Homeland Security, you've been here at Justice. It's unique, I think, in that it is intended to be independent. I guess that goes to my question of how independent one can be. Like, you brought up Comey, which we're going to get to. Let's just talk about Epstein for a moment. Obviously, Mr. Blanche was extraordinarily involved in that. How does one keep their independence and still serve in these positions?
Yeah, let me go back a step and with regards to what we were talking about before with policy. So because it's not full independence, the Justice Department, if the historical anecdote I was giving with regards to President Clinton's 100,000 police initiative, if we were briefing the White House on a regular basis, daily basis on that. If that's a policy, right? The Justice Department is going to, through federal funding, through Congress, assist state and locals in how they hire and enforce public safety laws.
And you were justice at the time?
Yes,
Not at
yes.
the White House. Okay.
I was on that Hill. I worked on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and then I went from there to the Justice Department. Was integrally involved in the implementation of the President Clinton's community policing initiative, the 100,000 cops initiative. And if the White House called up and said, Miss Reno, you need to be over here at 10 a.m. and you're going to brief the White House on everything you're doing. And the White House said, we don't like this, we don't like that. You need to change that. That is expected. That is so. There's no independence
Because it's policy.
It's policy.
Okay.
Now, if Rahm Emanuel or Bruce Reed or someone in the Clinton White House called up Miss Reno and said, you need to be over here at 10 a.m. and we're going to give you a list. And here's the people you need to go investigate criminally. You need to go investigate these people because they're enemies of the president. You go figure out how to investigate them and you go figure out how to bring charges to them. No, that didn't occur before now. It did not occur in any administration, probably maybe the Nixon administration, but not too successfully then, because look what that resulted in.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he had an enemies list, but it's not clear exactly what happened to a lot of the people he didn't like. But okay, so that's a perfect segue, Dennis, to start talking about your involvement as the United States Attorney for Arizona. Well, why don't you start with something really, direct? I don't think many people really get what the U.S. Attorney does. So why don't you talk about the role? What is the role of the United States Attorney for whatever, how many are there? What are their jurisdictions? What do they get to do?
So there's 93 United States attorneys throughout the country, and you're
Smaller
nominated
than
by
the
the.
Senate.
Sorry.
Smaller than the Senate.
Right, right. All right. So you're nominated by the president and you're confirmed by the Senate. So you're not picked by the attorney general. You're not a lawyer picked by the attorney general. You're picked by the president of the United States, nominated, and you have to be confirmed by the Senate. So it's a presidential appointment. And there's 93 because I'll give you an example. I was the U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona. The District of Arizona is a federal jurisdiction, and it just happens to be in Arizona, the same as the state of Arizona. There's one. I was the chief law enforcement officer, federal chief law enforcement officer for the District of Arizona, meaning that any federal prosecutor in Arizona reported to me, and I determined which cases could be brought by federal agencies, because the federal agencies investigate matters. The U.S. attorney prosecutes them. They file the charges, go to the grand jury, etc. The reason why there's 93, some of it's just historic. Not surprisingly, California has four. New York
Or
New York has four. Good. And then you've got these oddities like abnormalities, like Oklahoma has three and Alabama has three. And I
interesting.
think a lot of that, Richard, you're not going to be surprised about this, but I think a lot of that stems from U.S. senators, back at a certain juncture saying, you know, I could have three people I could pick instead of one. Why would I have one U.S. attorney for the District of Oklahoma? We could have three districts. And I mean, pretty sure that's pretty much how it came about. So it didn't, it had less to do with California, Texas, and New York of size. We're just going to need more districts because of the amount of cases and investigations. Some of these U.S. attorneys' offices were literally just, political aberrations of some senator wanting to have more U.S. attorneys he or she could pick.
Wow. So there's no connection to popular. It's not like Congress, congressional
No.
district. It's just. And so talk to me a little bit about your role. Like, what did you do? You alluded to the fact of the cases you get. How does it work? How much discretion, Dennis, did you have over which cases you would bring or cases you wouldn't bring?
Immense discretion. And, particularly in the District of Arizona, there's a huge presence by the Department of Homeland Security agencies that bring investigatory matters to prosecutors for a whole host of reasons. One, the obvious one is, hey, we arrested this individual for a federal offense, and here's our investigative report, and we're asking you to draft an indictment, U.S. attorney, and we're asking you to present this to a grand jury, and we're asking you to, take this to trial. But it's much broader than that because a lot of these investigations require search warrants. A lot of these investigations require wiretaps. Uh, and the U.S. attorney oversees all those. So in order to get search warrants, the federal agents from FBI and Secret Service and DEA and ICE were coming to our office, the U.S. Attorney's office, asking us to draft search warrants that could be presented to a magistrate, federal magistrate, to do a search or to do a wiretap. So it's broader than just federal agencies going to the prosecutor saying, "Hey, we arrested this guy. You need to get him prosecuted." It is literally a overseeing how federal agencies, law enforcement agencies, operate in your district.
Did you have the right if they came to say no? No, I don't think that's a good case. I'm not bringing it, or I don't like that case for whatever reason.
That would happen daily.
Oh, really? So explain to me. So a federal
Well,
agency
I'll give
comes
you.
to you.
I'll give you a good example. All
Okay.
right. All right. I'll pull the wool off one of them. So this is not when I was U.S. attorney. This is when I was a line prosecutor. I was assistant United States attorney.
Right.
And I used to work on drug investigations. And the DEA back then, this is in the mid 90s, had a penchant for arresting too many individuals. And
What does that mean? Too many individuals? Like they randomly arrest people? There's no
what
probable cause, or
yeah, what it appeared to me and others was that certain groups at DEA were getting credit for how many people they arrested and not how many people were indicted. And
I see.
so there'd be an incentive to arrest 10 people instead of 6 people,
I see.
and then go let the federal prosecutor figure it out. If the federal prosecutor comes back and goes, look, we're actually, you only have basis to indict 4 of these people that you arrested, and I'm letting the other 6 go. That was not uncommon. I had a case where they brought in a list of the defendants they had arrested, and I was going through them. I'm the prosecutor, and I'm going through them, and like, who's this guy? Well, he was across the street from the drug takedown, and he kept looking over at us. And I said, "That's it? That's all you have?" Yeah, yeah. He looked over. He was watering his lawn. He was across the street from the house that they busted. It's like, cut this guy loose. I mean, they're
Right.
so yeah. You're on a day-to-day basis. The U.S. Attorney's Office is interacting with federal agencies on a whole host of investigations at all stages, and digging down to figure out, who is this individual and why was this person arrested, and can we actually charge him or her with anything?
I assume Holder was Attorney General when you were
Actually, I worked for Miss Reno first,
when
and
you were
then
right. I mean, as U.S. Attorney,
yeah, Holder.
it was Holder. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Does the AG ever get involved? Like, you're sitting there, Dennis, in Phoenix, you're going through the cases, you're saying, I'm throwing this one out, I'm keeping this one. Does, we used to call it Main Justice. I don't know if you guys still do.
Yep.
Main
Yep.
Justice. Does Main Justice ever get involved and say, Dennis, you really need to be prosecuting more of these type of cases, or you need to, we're looking over your list and I saw you got rid of Joe Smith, and why'd you do that? I mean, who oversees the U.S. attorneys? How does that process work?
Well, technically, you report to the Deputy Attorney General, so that would be Todd Blanche in the current administration. But you interact with the criminal division. You could, on particular matters, you could be interacting with the environmental division.
Sure.
So there's a whole host
Tax,
of,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, definitely tax. I mean, not to get off on a tangent, but if you're a U.S. attorney and you're bringing a tax matter, the tax division is definitely involved, and there's
Sure.
reasons for that. The sensitivity of bringing tax matters is very high, and then they want uniformity across the country, and so the idea that U.S. attorneys are out there doing a lot of tax cases, which they do, but they're not doing them without the approval of the tax division.
You
So
could tell where I worked, Dennis. I worked in the tax division, and my major responsibility was reading stuff like Al Capone's tax files or Frank Sinatra's. I had a really interesting time of it. I'm probably the last one who read Al Capone's tax files. Um, okay, so the Attorney General is basically out of.
but can I go back on that?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
please.
yeah. So So you alluded to whether, is Main Justice going to a U.S. attorney out in the field and saying, these are the cases you should be doing more of these and less of these. Absolutely, they're doing that because, I had despite it was the District of Arizona, we had the seventh largest office in the country. So DC, obviously the largest. A few of the New York ones, a few in Texas and California, but we were the seventh largest. We were given a considerable amount of funding to hire prosecutors to work on border cases. So a lot of prosecutors, the funding decisions that are made by Maine Justice, which is, hey, U.S. Attorney in South Dakota, you're going to get 3 new federal prosecutors. You know what they're going to work on? They're going to work on Indian country cases. And so because of that, then there's all the reason in the world that Maine Justice would come back in 3 months, 6 months and go, wait a minute, we gave you 3 prosecutors to work on Indian country cases, and they're working on some other kind of case. That's not why we gave you that prosecutor. So from a designation of why you have that prosecutor in your office and the funding behind that is definitely driven by the Justice Department as to what kind of cases they should be doing and what kind of production you should have.
It sounds like you're drawing a really bright line between policy, we're going to do more in Native American cases and um, and true law cases, right? It sounds like there's a difference between we're going to prosecute James Smith because he did X, or we're going to prosecute more people for violating Indian rights. So it sounds like Maine Justice gets involved if it's dealing with these large policy issues, but you, Dennis, made the decision on individual. Do I prosecute Mr. Smith? Yes or no? That's Dennis Burke. But if we prosecute more drug cases, that's Washington.
That's correct. I think you summed it up very well. I did that would be how I would delineate it, with the added caveat that if you're a U.S. attorney and the FBI and your field office in Phoenix or Tucson is working on a matter that you're giving them legal guidance on, to investigate the governor of the state of Arizona or the Secretary of State or a member of Congress, you're definitely giving a heads up to the Justice Department. That's not the John Smith, hey, I get to decide. I'm the U.S. Attorney. I get to decide whether I take this case or not. You can't tell me. Yeah, it's not a. Actually, it is in the policy manual, Justice Department policy manual, as to certain cases that you have to give notification to the Justice Department that you're working on, and that would come up through 2 veins. It would come up through me as a U.S. attorney to tell the Deputy Attorney General or the Executive Office of U.S. Attorneys, hey, you need to know there's a high sensitive matter going on in our district, and you should know. You're not going to tell me what search warrants I'm going to do and so forth, but you need to know this. So it comes up through my vein, but it also comes up through the investigations being done by a federal agency. So if it's the FBI is going to tell their headquarters, hey, we have a lead on why we should be investigating this member of Congress or this state official or this mayor.
But you were doing the investigation. It doesn't sound like someone told you go investigate the mayor.
No.
Do you think that is going on now?
You're coming full circle, aren't you?
You go where you got to go.
Very well done. You've done this before.
Well, counselor.
Yeah, I think that's going on right now. And as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I've been doing this for over 30 years. There's whether in the department or around the department or conducting oversight of the department, I don't ever recall, coming literally from the White House to the Justice Department to a U.S. Attorney's office, go find a way to go investigate this guy.
Right.
It just didn't happen. Did not happen. Maybe under Nixon.
In your state, as I recall, Governor Symington, right? Probably before your time, right? But I mean,
no, I actually know the governor very well.
Yeah, but that whole investigation had to be triggered someplace. It was probably triggered by the U.S. Attorney, not from Washington.
No, my recollection was that since it was a a real estate transaction that there were other parties involved, and the other parties, had notified someone in law enforcement about the matter. I mean, that's how a lot of this stuff comes up, right? I mean, the FBI gets all kinds of leads every day. Someone's calling the FBI with a lead, and so they actually have an extremely difficult job of like kind of working through the list of phone calls they get as to, hey, you need to look at something, or so not even that matter emanated from the ground, as opposed to anyone
A
coming from
local.
DC saying go get this guy.
So look, we talked about how one gets their job as a U.S. attorney. Let's talk about how one loses their job as a U.S. attorney, okay? Um, it's really funny if you Google this, like U.S. attorney firings, there'll be something that says, Bill Clinton fired this, Obama fired this, Bush fired. Well, yeah, every president, when they come into office, you alluded to it before, you're a governmental presidential appointee. You serve at the pleasure of the president of the United States. And I think it's rather traditional that every U.S. attorney in the country either resigns or is replaced by the incoming president. So I don't look at that the same way as a firing. I look at that as a new administration comes in, new people get appointed.
Yeah, and there are instances where a prosecutor, I can think of the one that while I was during the Obama administration, there was you would call them holdovers, but they were
Sure.
prosecutors. There was one in Nevada that Harry Reid really liked, and he was an appointee of George Bush, and Senator Harry Reid, the majority leader, made it clear to the White House, this guy's doing a good job, and I don't have a nominee to recommend to you. Keep this guy, and it happened in New Orleans too with Jim Letton, who was a great reputation in the Justice Department, as a prosecutor. The Louisiana senators notified the White House and said, we don't need a new nominee. First of all, you don't have to ask him to resign, and second of all, we're not going to give you a new nominee, because we want this guy to continue. So that's not uncommon.
I would have to assume they're pretty apolitical.
Pretty apolitical, and I don't know the actual circumstances of it, but at some point or another, someone in the Harry Reid camp or someone in the Louisiana congressional delegation thought this guy's doing a good job, and why mess with this?
So let's talk about what's happening recently, okay? Because there have been a number of firings of U.S. attorneys around the country. Um, And it seems the U.S. attorneys who are being fired because they are not bringing, this is exactly the opposite of what you just described. They're not bringing the cases that the president wants. For example, they're not bringing cases against opponents of the president like James Comey, like Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York. Um, for example, Eric Siebert, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, which is the area right outside of Washington, Alexandria, and that whole thing, was fired because he refused to indict James Comey, which I want to talk about in a second. He was replaced by Lindsay Halligan. I want to talk to you a little bit. I want to talk to you about the firing specifically, but I also want to talk to you, Dennis, about the qualifications of who gets to be a U.S. attorney. Like, what do they look for when they appoint someone? Because I don't know Ms. Halligan at all. I didn't know who she was until recently. But I do know from listening to things about her that she's never argued a case in court before, that she was basically an insurance attorney for a couple of years. And then the one thing I thought was really interesting, a reporter asked her what makes her equipped to do the job, and she commented that it was her experience as a beauty queen contestant and playing sports,
Hmm.
is why she had the temperament to be a good U.S. attorney. So
Okay.
talk, yeah. So talk to me first, Dennis, about how do you get, what makes you qualified? Before you talked about our current Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and said she's eminently qualified. Clearly she is, right? Former Attorney General of Florida, trial attorney,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. What makes someone qualified to be a U.S. attorney? And I bring up Ms. Halligan only because the president replaced someone who had been there for quite some time with her. I'm just interested in knowing what makes someone qualified.
Well, it's very broad, and so there's no boxes necessarily to check. Um, and a lot of I can think of the U.S. attorneys in my class when I was nominated had an array of all kinds of interesting backgrounds. Um, and but the process, Richard, is uh, is you need to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. So what's that mean? That means that if you're in a district where there's a senator of the same party of the current administration, they're going to call up the White House and say, "Here's my pick." Now, in my state, not not when I was nominated, but during Republican administrations, Senators McCain and Flake, I remember, um, put a committee together, and so the committee of prominent lawyers in the District of Arizona would interview candidates to be U.S. attorney, and then recommend them to McCain and Flake, and then McCain and Flake would send the name to the White House. There have been times when the White House has said you got to send us more than one name, um, but so it really comes from. I mean, these are Senate confirmed positions. So U.S. senators uh, enjoy a very broad power of having a role in picking who their U.S. attorney is in their district. And that goes back to that we were talking about it earlier, is about why does Alabama have 3 U.S. attorneys? Well, you know, powerful Alabama senators in past said, I'm gonna pick my U.S. attorneys whether they're presidential appointees or not, um, and one's not enough. I'm gonna have 3.
So there's no stereotype. Stereotype's the wrong word. Archetype is probably a better word of the type of person. I think a lot of people were just surprised by Halligan just because of her lack of judicial experience and her
Yeah, I
age.
mean,
I mean, she's very
well,
young, but that's not a discriminating factor, or shouldn't be a discriminating factor necessarily. It's sort of an experience thing.
no, but yeah, to that point, I think back on my personal experience that my colleagues, when I was nominated to be U.S. attorney from the other districts, very few did not have some Justice Department experience. Very few of them had not been a line prosecutor or had worked at Main Justice. I mean, you think of Paul Fishman, the U.S. attorney in New
Sure.
Jersey.
Know Paul well. Great guy.
Great guy, eminently qualified. I mean, he was the first assistant U.S. attorney um, in the District of New Jersey. Had trial experience. He worked at Main Justice for Jamie Gorilich. I mean, that's your prototype. But there were also attorneys that were nominated to be the U.S. attorney that spent their career in civil practice, but had tons of trial experience or were involved in major matters. I mean, U.S. attorneys bring civil matters too. It's
Right.
not all criminal. And so if a senator says, I'm going to nominate this guy, of course he's a friend of mine or he's a big supporter of mine. That guy or he or she came from a major law firm in that district and not worked at the Justice Department, but knew how to manage an office and knew how to evaluate cases.
Well, as we know, the U.S. Attorney's Office is a pretty powerful job. I mean, and for a lot of people, it's a big stepping stone. You look at Chris Christie in New Jersey, Rudy Giuliani in New York. I mean, we could just go on and on. Let me just ask you. I mean,
Yeah,
you spoke.
Jenny Durkin was in my class from Washington. She became the mayor of Seattle.
Right,
Yeah.
right. You talked about the confirmation process a few times. We should comment that I think you were confirmed unanimously, correct? I think it was a
Yeah, but
voice
that's
vote.
that's typical.
Okay, well, let's just go, Dennis.
I mean, if your nomination is going to get killed, it gets killed before the vote. Let's just put it
Okay.
that
So
way.
why don't you just take the kudos, take the bow, and take the applause? Way to go. You were confirmed unanimously. Um, but that's not what's going on right now. What's going on right now, I mean, I look at New Jersey and Alina, I probably get her name wrong, Alina
Haba.
Haba, I believe it is. She is unconfirmed. Um, Not only is she unconfirmed, but the Third Circuit, the circuit courts that represent, make up New Jersey, have all told the president that they don't believe she should be the U.S. attorney. But the president has kept her there in an acting position. You look at Ms. Halligan, who we just spoke about in Virginia. So the president fires the U.S. attorney in Virginia, puts someone in an interim position. Similar thing happened in New Jersey. So my point is, people are now getting in these extraordinarily powerful jobs. They're not being confirmed. There's no advice and consent. They're not being confirmed by the United States Senate. They're doing a job. I think we could easily, and we're going to get there in about half a second, they're doing a job that's being asked of them specifically. It's going against everything, Dennis, that you laid out. It's not, it's not give me the job, I'm qualified, I will make a decision. It's here's a job. You're going to get it if you agree to do the following prosecutions. So, what do you think about where the Senate confirmation is on this? What is the role of the Senate in this? We're putting U.S. attorneys in an interim position. There's really no legal position except what I hear the Third Circuit did of trying to get them out. But they're doing work. They're continuing to do what they're being asked to do.
Yeah, I think the Senate has abdicated its responsibility completely. I mean, if this had occurred, I worked for Senator Dennis DeConcini in Arizona. I worked on the Judiciary Committee for him, and I remember vividly when President Clinton won. Senator DeConcini quickly, if he already didn't have it in his head, had a quick list of every federal nominee in the District of Arizona from every agency, from from agriculture to the U.S. Marshal. He had a list, and he was going to recommend to the White House who would fill that. So to use that as an example, in that situation, if the White House were just picking their own person and sticking them there and saying, even though there's only 120 days where acting U.S. attorney can be there, and we're just going to not follow that law and so forth, that DeConcini would have gone through the roof. He would say, look, you're violating what you should be doing in my district, and I'll get you on the back end because I'm on the appropriations committee. That's how the process worked. I mean, and it worked well, right? I mean, in other words, the Senate was involved too. They have an oversight responsibility. They also have a sense of like, these are people that are being picked for federal jobs in a state where I'm a U.S. senator, and I'm not only supposed to be conducting oversight, but I'm supposed to be conducting advice and consent, which is confirmation. And the White House is just going along, picking anybody they can who they know will do anything for them, which is what happened in the Comey matter.
So why, so what should Senator Warner and Senator Kaine be doing specifically in Virginia?
Well,
I
it's
mean, they're in the
difficult.
minority. What can
They're,
they're in the majority in their state, they're in the minority in the Congress.
yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, you don't have the leverage being in the minority, but at some point or another, and this is happening, Schumer's doing it to some extent, is if you're going to be doing this to my district, my state, the district that's in my state, and you're going to be putting these unqualified people here, and you're going to be having these political indictments, then I'm going to start holding up other nominees in the Senate. We're gonna have other ways to have a leverage point to have some say in what you're doing that's impacting my state.
Which is why the Republicans are changing the rules in the Senate.
Exactly. I
So,
didn't say it was foolproof, Richard. I
yeah,
just
I got
said
it. But that is the method. Look, we've mentioned his name 5 times now. I think we should talk about it. James Comey. James Comey everyone knows James Comey was indicted this week, the former director of the FBI, the first FBI director in American history to ever be indicted. He was indicted on two charges, both stemming from testimony to Congress in 2000, September 30th of 2000, which mean, excuse me, 2020, which means that the statute of limitations was going to run, well, in a day. So that's why he had to be indicted quickly. The sitting U.S. attorney refused to indict him. He got fired. That's why Ms. Halligan was appointed. So that's just to give the background of all of this. Um, Comey is interesting. He's disliked by everybody, right? I mean, if you're a Democrat, you think he stole the 2016 election by the comments he made about Hillary Clinton right before the election. If you're a Republican, you can't stand him because he's been an arch enemy of Donald Trump. He doesn't have a lot of people who love him. I hope Mrs. Comey does. I was saddened, I must say, to see that they went after his daughter, which I thought was the sins of the father should not be inflicted upon the daughter. But he was indicted for lying to Congress. What do you make of the indictment? I mean, you're a U.S. attorney. Is that the type of case you would bring?
No, let's
Why?
go back to a concept we've discussed a number of times already, which is the discretion of a U.S. attorney. And why in God's name now, particularly when the department is as busy as it is and all the matters it's working on, are you going to reach back and to create some flimsy accusation against a former FBI director about testimony that from all sides could be only viewed as a confusing interaction between him and Senator Cruz? You're going to go back now and go, I'm going to indict this now. The last week I can indict it. Something that occurred 5 years ago about his testimony on one matter when the FBI director testifies in front of Congress, 25 times a year. It is you from a discretion perspective. How did this ever become a priority? And on in a long hearing on one particular matter that I'll have to go back and look, but I don't even recall that was the purpose of the overall hearing as to why he was testifying.
Well, it does get complicated that his deputy, Andrew McCabe, said he did lie. So, I mean, I guess that sets up. It's interesting that Trump doesn't like either of them. So it'll be interesting to see how that.
Well, here's an interesting point about, since you have me on about the perspective of a U.S. attorney, part of the U.S. as the prosecutor is, well, what's my case? How am I building my case?
Right.
So it's not. So first of all, I just discussed discretion, and if it were me, whoever that FBI director was, I would not consider this a priority, and I would find it a very tough case. Well, it's all the tougher when McCabe came out the other day on TV and said, I've never been interviewed by the FBI about this. I mean, that's your witness. Like,
Wow.
like, what case did you put together? I mean, is it just on the record? I mean, the record's confusing. It's confusing as to what Comey, because it was a validation of something he had said at a hearing 4 years before that, 3 years before that, and you never interview McCabe.
Yeah, who should be your star witness, I would assume. So, do you think it ever gets a trial? I mean, I'm trying to figure out why, except for bothering the hell out of Comey and costing him a ton of money and just annoying the heck out of him. Do you ever see a case like this getting to trial? Because I'm not so sure it's in the president's best interest.
I don't think he cares one way or another whether it goes to trial, because I think he thinks he wins either way. It's all about retribution. So he's screwing with Comey's life and his reputation. And if it's thrown out on emotion, Comey's not vindicated. The White House will claim, some, you can hear it now, some corrupt judge that was appointed by Biden or Obama, let this guy
Biden,
off. Yeah, we need to impeach this judge. We need to impeach this judge. I mean, it's just, so he, from the perspective of the White House and the president, he believes he wins either way. I got my retribution. I screwed with this guy's life, and I tarnished him further. And if it gets thrown out, well, that's further proof that the judicial system's corrupt.
You talked about retribution a lot, and that seems to be a motif in this administration, and the president doesn't run from that. He doesn't hide from it. I mean, in his speech about his eulogy for Charlie Kirk, he talked about his hatred for his opponents and whatnot. And as we said before, he's going after Letitia James. He's going after James Comey. He talked about going after organizations, and the Attorney General spoke about this specifically, going after organizations who were critical of Charlie Kirk, who did not do what she felt was appropriate after the sadness and the hideousness of his assassination, but who did not do what they deemed appropriate. What is this going to do to the Department of Justice? What does this do to U.S. attorneys? I mean, will this have a chilling effect on how they perform their job?
Absolutely. The U.S. attorneys have discretion. Line prosecutors are working on cases that are being investigated, but they're not oblivious to what's going on around. I mean, they're
So do they pull back on certain cases because they don't want to be? Look, a lot of them get fired. A lot of people, DOJ left. A lot of people were let go. Anyone who worked on a number of these cases, people who worked on anything dealing with January 6th were let go. So
yeah. I mean, I heard a commentary this morning that if they continue to pursue this in the Eastern District of Virginia to go after Comey, there could be a slew of more resignations, and you're putting people in a really, really difficult position, which is I'm going to lose my job. Right?
yeah.
I'm going to lose my job. And the reason why I quit, although principled, I got to go get a job with a law firm or a county attorney or a city attorney's office. I love my job. I think, it puts a huge burden. These are people, man. This is their livelihood. They've got families, their kids, they're paying tuition. And all of a sudden I'm going to quit on principle, which we all applaud, but who's paying, who's paying my utilities next month? I don't have a job and I got to go find a job. And I think the other mentality is, which I think is fair, because I used to see this even when I was at the Justice Department, a lot of career folks is, we were here before you, we'll be here after you. And I just got to weather through this. And this is awful. And it doesn't impact my life all the time because I'm not directly doing these cases, but I got to have a livelihood. And this too shall pass. And I'll still have my job. And all these Trump people will be, off to their next adventure.
Let me turn you to a completely different time in your life, if I may, and ask for your expertise on something else. It's sort of interesting. We're sitting here approximately, unless something happens since we've been on our Zoom, we're 36 hours away from a government shutdown, right? And I know the president's meeting with the legislative leaders today and whatnot. You have worked everywhere. You have a unique perspective on this because you worked in the White House. You worked in the federal government with Justice and Homeland Security. You worked in the Senate, so you worked in the legislative branch. You worked as a U.S. attorney, you worked as chief of staff for a governor, so you've sort of been around the track a little bit. Walk me through a shutdown. Walk me through what this really means. Why don't we start with your expertise in the United States Senate? What do you understand? If you were still in the Senate, still talking to your senator, what are they doing? What are the Democrats doing specifically to avoid the government coming to a complete and utter halt?
Well, I mean, I think they're rallying around particular political points, which is how is this going to be perceived? I mean, the Democrats' position right now is we're not going to buckle and allow any CR, continuing resolution, or any continuance of government without a shutdown that impacts the subsidies under that Affordable Health Care Act. And so, I think their perspective, belaboring the obvious, is what's the point where we can't walk away from this? We just have to buckle down and realize this is going to happen. I actually worked when I was in the White House. We had a shutdown. this was and it's the terminology is essential employees can still show up.
Right.
Essential employees are
Or
usually
pizza delivery people, if I remember that shutdown well.
yeah. I mean, but the essential employees are the ones that make sure that that the office doesn't catch on fire, or that if it's in the winter that the heat stays on. I was on the Domestic Policy Council, which is an entity within the White House.
Right.
And so I worked on policy. So they're like, you don't need to be showing up. So you had to sneak in.
Funny.
But I'll leave that for another day.
We're not, yes, we all remember that. Okay, now put yourself in your working for the administration point of view. What does this actually mean for the agencies you worked for? What happens to the Department of Justice? What happens to Homeland Security? The government has shut. It's out of money. What happens on October 1st? What are these agencies allowed to do? You just talked about you had to sneak into the White House. What do these agencies do, and what does that mean to all of us?
It depends. Like for example, if you and your family have plans to visit the Grand Canyon National Park, you're screwed because they'll close the parks down. I mean, that's not an essential service. Are you not going to get you're going to get your Social Security check?
How about Medicaid, Medicare, those type
Yeah, I
of things?
mean, yeah. I mean, are there certain delay functions even in a shutdown that for a certain I apologize, I can't off the top of my head recall it, but that continue even during a shutdown. For example, the courts don't shut down. Courts continue to operate not only as an essential function, but even under the funding of the federal government, it allows the courts to stay up. But even that might have a timeline on it. The idea that emergency decisions made by a federal district judge impacting life aren't going to occur is not true. I mean, they will continue under a shutdown.
So as U.S. attorney, you would continue to work.
None of the line prosecutors would come in now. I
But if
mean,
the courts are open, the attorneys have to be open, no?
it depends on what the matter is, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if it's an emergency order, yeah, you would direct your line prosecutor to say you're essential. You need to come in and you need to go make this argument in front of a judge, and the judge is still there. But if you're a prosecutor and you have a bunch of long-term investigations, which a lot of them do, I mean, they're not, they're working on matters that take months and months. You need to stay home.
Put your chief of staff hat on. You're now running a state government. What does this do to the state government?
Well, the majority of state governments, a large percentage of your overall budget is passed through federal funding.
Right.
Um, um, but a lot of that is already being provided, right? I mean, it's already in it's already in the pipeline, or the state government already has it. There might be drawdown accounts, in certain programs where you're just going to get delayed. They're going to tell you, don't draw down on that until we get this resolved. We don't know how long this government shutdown is going to be, but you can't draw down on that. But it
The
impacts. I mean,
highway pro the
sorry, go ahead.
highway projects stop. Do, all these things that the feds pay for? Food stamps. Like what happens to all those type of things?
Yeah, but the overwhelming amount of federal transportation projects have been contracted out uh, to private construction companies. So they for
They
a
keep
lot of
going?
them, they could keep going. And unless, I mean, it's also up to the United States Department of Transportation. I mean, there is some discretion, and it might be driven politically to have an impact. That the Secretary of Transportation could say, "I realize I can make an argument that this stuff could continue even under a shutdown." Well, guess what? Shut it down. I want people to realize that you're not
Yeah.
getting around. You can't get that. You can't get around town because these projects are being stopped.
and get Congress to pass a budget that people could compromise on.
Yeah.
Um, what would happen if we had a Katrina, a national emergency that usually Homeland Security, is all over? What would happen in a situation like that?
So the combination of essential employees with emergency occurrence would allow a response. I think the reality is combined with the fact that the politics would drive to an agreement at that point.
Yeah.
but
I just
but
wonder if there are
but if you're
enough people.
asking, yeah, if you're asking the technical aspects of it, if you had a storm that required, is FEMA left, Richard? I don't know. Did Trump get rid of FEMA? Do we still have FEMA?
There is a
I
FEMA.
lost track.
Yeah, the president said he wanted to get rid of FEMA, but I don't believe he has.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
let me,
Yeah.
let me, let me, we have decided, I think we're going to do this in two parts. So let me end this part on this, if I may. You worked directly with the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Correct.
You knew her well. You were her chief of staff when she was governor. I should add, she was my classmate back in the day. So I'm a fan. Um, Talk to me about the role of the secretary because I've been seeing, I've known Kristi Noem when she was governor of South Dakota, and I see her at these visiting these prisons in Central America or South America. I see her when ICE is rounding up people. I see her doing different types of things. I don't remember other secretaries doing that. I know. Secretary Napolitano never did that. We could just go through the whole list of people. Talk to me about the role of the secretary. I mean, I get commercials every night on television that say, if you're an illegal, if you've done something bad, you better leave the country right now before I come and get you. It's a very, very, very different role than your secretary. Talk about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure the roles are different. I think Secretary Noem's emphasis on publicizing what she's doing is different than any former Homeland Security Secretary. What I mean by that is that it's a massive agency, right? It cobbled together 22 different agencies and departments and created one, overnight. In fact, I remember we used to go to meetings and someone would have to identify where they were in the department, and they would still identify themselves as from the agency that existed before the Homeland Security Department was created. I'm INS Legacy, I'm
Yeah.
Customs Legacy. Like they wouldn't give it up. Um, so in order to really know what the department's doing, um, uh, uh, Napolitano and Johnson and Kelly and others went out to the field, right? I mean, I got to go meet the Coast Guard in the field. I got to go meet CBP at the border. They were doing all that. They weren't cosplaying it like Noam is. Like the Napolitano wasn't getting dressed up and strapping on a weapon.
Right.
Um, so
Well, she
she's
also never shot her own dog.
she never shot her own dog, right? So uh, so what
Couldn't resist that one.
I think what Nome has done is basically said, well, I'm going to be out here in the field with these guys, and let's get some publicity out of it, which is not the purpose of why you're out there. The purpose of why you're out there is to make you a better secretary, so that you can manage a department that you know better, right? Like now I've been out. There's nothing worse than a cabinet head who doesn't leave DC, right? And particularly when you have a agency that's sprawling, get out in the field, talk to these folks, interact with them, see what they do, go watch what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So that is absolutely part of the role. I think the difference is Napolitano didn't bring a camera crew with her, and then she didn't dress up like a firefighter. And that's what Noam's doing. And I think she's diminished the role because she's just turned it into like theater.
Well, Dennis, you've been really generous with your time. I know we're going to do a part two of this, and I think we've covered a lot of ground. So let's conclude part one.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. And then to all of you listening, join us for part two because there's a lot more Dennis Burke left to go.
Ah.
So I hope you'll all join us for that. So thank you very much, Dennis. Thank you to everybody who's listening. We'll catch you on the part 2, and till then, stay unconventional.
You've been listening to Unconventional Times with your host, Richard Gordon. Check out all of the episodes of Unconventional Times on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Richard Gordon and all of his unconventional conversations, head on over to unconventionaltimes.com. Thanks for listening.